All right, so you sent over a ton of stuff about digital identity protection. Seems like everyone's talking about it these days.
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic.
For this deep dive, we're going to go deep on identity threat protection, ITP for those in the know.
Okay, it's good.
And we'll see why it's so important, especially with all the ways we're connected now.
It's amazing how much it's changed. We used to just worry about passwords and firewalls,
Right.
but now it's like you got to think about the whole picture,
Right.
like who's behind these threats, how they work, why they're doing it.
Totally. And especially those insider threats. I mean, it's not just hackers from outside anymore. We've got all this info on Capital One, Tesla, and Anthem. Some huge data breaches.
Oh yeah, definitely. Those insider threats are a big deal.
And those were big public messes. But we're also talking about the impact this stuff has on regular people, right?
Absolutely. It's huge. When data gets out there, it costs companies money, hurts their reputation, and of course impacts the people whose info gets compromised. It can really turn people's lives upside down.
So before we get into the weeds, let's define some stuff.
Okay.
For someone who's heard the term, but maybe doesn't deal with ITP every day, what does it actually mean?
Think of it like a shield for your digital identity. It's tech, it's processes, and a big part of it is people being aware.
Okay.
All of that works together to keep people from getting into your accounts, your data, basically your whole online life.
Okay, so lots of layers of defense. But with all these regulations, GDPR, CCPA, IPA, is ITP really just about checking boxes for compliance? Or is there more to it?
Compliance is definitely a part of it, but ITP is really about stopping problems before they even start.
Yeah.
Those regulations came about because of real breaches, breaches that caused a lot of damage. ITP is about making sure that kind of stuff doesn't happen in the first place.
So it's about being proactive, not just cleaning up the mess afterward.
Exactly.
Got it. Now, let's talk about those insider threats. Our sources really highlight those. What makes them different from attacks coming from the outside, and what types should we be watching out for?
Well, with insider threats, the person already has some level of access. They might be employees, contractors, or even partners. And it's not always that they're trying to do something bad. Sometimes it's just carelessness.
Oh, yeah. We all know someone who's clicked on a phishing link. I mean, I've probably done it myself.
Exactly. And that's what leads to different types of insider threats. You've got the ones you see in the news, the ones who are really trying to cause trouble, like a disgruntled employee out for revenge, or a corporate spy stealing secrets.
Like that thing with Tesla back in 2018, right? Where an employee messed with their systems and stole their data. Talk about a double whammy.
Exactly. That's a perfect example of how much damage an insider can do. But then you also have the unintentional insider threat. Someone who means well but messes up. They fall for a phishing scam or use a weak password, and then they accidentally help a breach happen.
So it's not always about evil masterminds. Sometimes it's just human mistakes, which makes you wonder, how can companies prevent their employees from becoming those accidental threats? What does good ITP training actually look like?
Well, that's where security awareness training is so important.
Yeah.
And I don't just mean those boring annual compliance modules.
Right.
It's about making security part of the company culture. Having employees constantly learning about new threats and how to stay safe. Things like phishing simulations or interactive scenarios, and making sure security is a regular topic in company communication.
So make it engaging, not just those dry presentations everyone forgets about.
Exactly.
That makes sense. But even with the best training, some people are still going to get tricked. So how can ITP help limit the damage when someone becomes a way for an attack to happen, whether they meant to or not?
That's where identity and access management comes in, or IAM for short. Think of it as the gatekeeper for your systems, making sure only the right people get access to specific stuff.
So it's more than just passwords and logging in?
Oh yeah, for sure. Strong authentication is key. That means using multi-factor authentication, or MFA. So you need more than just a password to get in. It might be a code from an app, a biometric scan, or a security token.
So even if someone's password gets stolen, that extra layer makes it way harder for a hacker to actually get in.
Exactly. And IAM goes beyond just checking who you are. It's about controlling access in a very detailed way, making sure people can only see and use the information they need for their specific job. It's called the principle of least privilege.
So like compartmentalizing access.
Yeah, you could say that. It limits the damage someone can do even if they get into an account.
Makes sense.
And then there's single sign-on, SSO. That lets people log in once and get into multiple systems. It's more secure, and it's easier for users because they don't have to juggle a bunch of different passwords.
Fewer passwords, less chance of those sticky notes with logins scribbled on them. I like it. But what about managing all those accounts? Creating them, changing them, deleting them? That sounds like a nightmare.
Well, that's where identity lifecycle management comes in. It automates that whole process, make sure that access is given and taken away quickly and securely.
Like a digital HR department, just for online identities.
Exactly. When someone joins the company, they get access to what they need. When they leave, access is cut off right away. No more forgotten accounts just sitting there for attackers to find.
And that's super important now with so many people working remotely and using cloud apps.
Exactly. People are accessing sensitive data from all over the place and from all kinds of devices.
So ITP is like building a secure fence, even when that fence is constantly moving and changing. But what about the data itself? How do companies protect information from being stolen, especially now that everything's going to the cloud?
Well, that's where encryption and privacy come in. Encryption basically scrambles the data, so it can't be read without the right key. And that applies to data when it's being sent over networks and when it's just sitting on servers or devices.
Like locking it up in a digital vault that can't be cracked.
Exactly. And having strong privacy policies is essential. That's how you make sure personal information is handled the right way, ethically and legally. Following those regulations we talked about earlier.
Okay, so ITP protects who has access, what they can access, and how they access it. But all these safeguards only go so far, right? We've seen some major breaches in the news, Capital One, Anthem, and of course Tesla. What went wrong in those cases, and what can we learn from them?
Well, with Capital One, back in 2019, they had a misconfigured firewall,
Okay.
and a former employee was able to use that to get into their systems and steal data. It shows how important it is to have security measures, but also to constantly check that they're working properly.
So even a small mistake can have huge consequences.
Definitely. And then there's Anthem. In 2015, hackers got in by stealing login credentials. It just shows how important it is to have strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, and constant security training.
It all comes back to human error being the weak link. But with Tesla, wasn't that more about sabotage than some technical flaw?
Yeah, in 2018, they had an employee who intentionally messed up their systems and stole data. This highlights how important it is to track what users are doing, control access tightly, and have plans in place to quickly spot and deal with insider threats.
So you need to be prepared to react effectively when something does happen, to minimize the damage and get things back to normal quickly. Speaking of new approaches, one thing we see a lot in our sources is the zero trust model. What's that all about?
Zero trust basically means you don't trust anyone by default, even if they're already inside your network. You verify every single request, every time.
So no more assuming someone's trustworthy just because they're on the inside.
Exactly. You get rid of automatic trust and check every single action and connection. It's a totally different way of thinking about security.
And it makes sense with everyone working remotely and using cloud apps, but how do you actually implement zero trust? It sounds pretty massive.
It's definitely a big change, but the payoff is huge. You start by making sure users are really who they say they are. Then you control access carefully, so people can only get to the specific resources they need for their job.
Like super strict least privilege.
Yeah. And you also need to be watching network traffic all the time, looking for anything that seems off. This is where AI and machine learning can help. They can analyze tons of data and spot things humans might miss.
So it's like having a security system that never takes a break. But with all this tech, does it get too complicated for users? Isn't there a balance between security and keeping things user-friendly?
That's a good point. Security shouldn't make things harder for people. The goal is to make it seamless and easy to use so people don't feel like they have to find ways around it.
Because if it's too complicated, people will find shortcuts, and then the whole point is lost. Speaking of user experience, one of the things you sent talked about advanced authentication, especially biometrics. What's the thinking there?
Biometrics are becoming more and more popular because they're more secure and easier to use than passwords. Things like fingerprints, facial recognition, even iris scans.
Sounds futuristic, but are they really foolproof? Can't they be hacked or faked?
Well, nothing's foolproof, but biometrics are a lot harder to forge than passwords. And the technology is getting better all the time. There are even things like behavioral biometrics now, which look at how someone interacts with a device. That makes it even more secure.
So it's not just what you are, but how you use your device. That's pretty smart. But with all this advanced technology, is ITP getting too expensive and complicated for smaller companies to keep up?
That's a valid concern. But the good news is that ITP solutions are becoming more affordable, even for smaller companies. Cloud-based platforms are a cost-effective way to get strong security without having to buy expensive hardware or hire a bunch of IT people.
So the cloud is making high-end security accessible to everyone.
Yeah, pretty much.
But with so many options out there, how do you choose the right one? It's overwhelming.
You're right, there's a ton of stuff out there. You need to start by figuring out what your company really needs. What are the specific risks and weaknesses? Then you can look for solutions that address those specific issues and that work well with your existing systems.
So don't just buy the flashiest new thing, figure out what you actually need.
Exactly.
But even beyond the technology itself, how do companies need to change their thinking to really embrace ITP?
Well, they need to move away from that old idea of just building a wall around their systems. They need to be more proactive and realize that threats can come from anywhere, even inside the company.
So instead of a fortress, it's more like a dynamic defense system that's always adapting.
Exactly. And they need to realize that security isn't just an IT problem. Everyone in the company needs to be involved.
So it's not just about ticking boxes and following rules, it's about making security part of the company's DNA.
Exactly. That's how you build a company that's truly resilient and secure.
Okay, so we've covered a lot here. From what ITP is to the different types of threats, the key parts of a strong security strategy, and how companies need to change their thinking to prioritize security. But before we move on to specific examples and tools, I'm curious, we've talked a lot about companies, but what about individuals? What can people do to protect their own digital lives?
That's a great question. It's more important now than ever.
Stay tuned, folks, because we'll be getting into that right after the break. All right, so we talked about what companies are doing, but what about us, regular folks?
Right.
What can we do to protect ourselves, especially with all these data breaches and scams going around?
You're right to be thinking about that. It's super important to protect yourself online. The good news is a lot of what we talked about for companies applies to individuals too.
Okay.
It's all about being proactive and having good security habits.
So give us the rundown. What are the top things people can do right now to, level up their security?
The first thing is to turn on multi-factor authentication everywhere you can. Email, banking, social media, all of it. It's a simple thing that makes a huge difference.
I'm all about MFA. I know some people think it's a pain, but honestly, those extra few seconds are worth it for the peace of mind.
Oh yeah, totally. A little inconvenience is nothing compared to being more secure. Next, use strong and unique passwords for everything.
Okay.
I know it's tempting to just use the same one over and over, but that's a recipe for disaster. If one account gets hacked, they all get hacked.
Ugh, password fatigue is real, but luckily there are password managers that can help us create and remember all those complicated passwords.
Password managers are great, and most of them have free versions that work just fine for personal use.
Right.
Another thing, be really careful about phishing emails and suspicious links. Don't click on anything that looks even a little bit off.
If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. And always check the URL before you click on a link. Make sure it's going where you expect.
Exactly. And remember, real companies will never ask you for your password or personal info through email or a random phone call.
So if you get an email that looks like it's from your bank asking for your login, don't fall for it.
Right. And keep an eye on your bank accounts and credit card statements. Look for anything suspicious and report it right away.
Good old-fashioned vigilance, still the best defense. Now, you mentioned MFA before. One of the things you sent over, a video called OTP MFA Explained, really dives into this.
Yeah, that's a good one. It explains how that type of MFA works. It stands for Open Authentication, Time-Based One-Time Password, Multi-Factor Authentication, by the way, and how to set it up.
It sounds complicated, but it's pretty simple. Instead of getting a code by text or email, you get it from an app on your phone. And that code changes all the time, so it's way harder for hackers to steal.
It's one of the most secure ways to do MFA, and it's pretty easy to use.
Okay.
Another thing people forget about is their home Wi-Fi. Make sure it's password protected with a strong password, and if you can, use WPA2 or WPA3 encryption. That adds another layer of security.
Because having an open Wi-Fi network is like leaving your front door wide open.
Exactly. And if you're working from home or using public Wi-Fi, you should really think about using a VPN.
VPNs are great. They encrypt your internet traffic so no one can snoop on what you're doing.
Plus, they can help you get around those annoying geo-restrictions and access content from other countries.
Always a bonus.
Right.
Now, we talked about cloud security for companies, but what about our personal cloud storage? Any tips for keeping that stuff safe?
Definitely. Cloud storage is super convenient, but make sure you're using a provider that takes security seriously. Look for things like encryption, two-factor authentication, and strong password policies.
And always back up your stuff. Just in case something happens to your device or your cloud account, you don't want to lose all your important files and photos.
Backups are essential. Think of your data like anything else you value. Protect it, back it up, don't just leave it lying around. And be careful about what you store in the cloud. Don't put super sensitive information there unless you're absolutely sure it's encrypted and protected with a strong password.
So use common sense and be smart about what you put out there.
Exactly. And speaking of putting things out there, let's talk about social media for a minute.
Oh, yeah.
We all love to share our lives online, but we have to remember it can be risky.
Social media is great for connecting with people, but it can also be a playground for scammers and hackers. What are some things people can do to stay safe?
First, be careful about what information you make public.
Yes.
Don't post things like your home address, phone number, or travel plans.
Right.
And check your privacy settings regularly. Make sure you're only sharing with people you actually trust.
And be careful about those friend requests from people you don't know. If it seems fishy, it probably is.
Totally. And be wary of those quizzes and games that want access to your info. They might seem harmless, but they could be collecting data about you for all sorts of shady reasons.
So think before you click allow. That fun little personality quiz could be up to no good.
And if you're ever not sure about something, just ask for help. Talk to your IT department, a security professional, or even a tech-savvy friend or family member. There's no shame in asking for advice when it comes to security.
Better safe than sorry. One of the videos you sent, Cloud Security Threats You Never Knew Existed, talks about some pretty scary stuff happening in the cloud. What are some of the key takeaways from that?
That video is a good reminder that things are changing fast and the threats are getting more sophisticated. One thing it points out is that traditional security stuff, like firewalls and antivirus, isn't enough anymore. Hackers have found ways around those defenses, and they're targeting data in the cloud.
So the battleground has shifted to the cloud.
Exactly. And the video really emphasizes the importance of a multi-layered approach to cloud security. You need a combination of tools and techniques to protect your data, whether it's being stored, transmitted, or actively used.
So it's not just about locking down the data center. It's about protecting the data at every stage.
That's right. And another important point the video makes is about something called cloud identity discovery.
Okay, with that.
Basically, it's about figuring out and managing all the different identities and permissions that have access to your cloud services. With so many people using cloud apps, it's easy to lose track of who has access to what.
So it's like taking inventory of all the keys to your cloud castle.
That's a good way to put it. And it's crucial for preventing unauthorized access and data breaches. The video shows how hackers take advantage of weak or misconfigured cloud identities to get their hands on sensitive data.
So you're not just protecting the data itself, you're protecting the ways people get access to it. Are there tools that can help with this?
Oh yeah, definitely. There are tools that can automate that whole process of finding and managing cloud identities. That makes it a lot easier to stay on top of things and avoid security gaps.
So it's not just about working harder, it's about working smarter, using automation.
Exactly. And speaking of automation, another trend we're seeing is more use of AI and machine learning for security.
AI seems to be everywhere these days. How is it being used for ITP?
Well, AI-powered security tools can analyze huge amounts of data in real time. They can spot patterns and anomalies that might indicate a security incident.
So it's like having a digital security guard that never sleeps.
That's a great way to think about it. And AI can also automate responses to threats, so you can contain and fix a breach faster. For example, an AI system could block a suspicious IP address or quarantine an infected device.
So it's not just about finding the threat, it's about reacting quickly and effectively. Speed is key in cybersecurity.
Absolutely. And AI helps us stay ahead of the game by doing those crucial tasks automatically. That frees up human security experts to focus on the more complex stuff.
So it's about augmenting human capabilities, not replacing them.
Right. Now, one of your sources mentioned resilient secrets for disaster recovery. What does that even mean?
Yeah, that one caught my eye too.
Well, secrets in this context refers to sensitive information. Passwords, API keys, encryption keys, anything that needs to be kept confidential. And resilient secrets means making sure this information is stored securely and can be recovered quickly if something bad happens. like a natural disaster, a cyber attack, or even just a hardware failure.
So it's like having a backup plan for your backup plan.
Exactly. You always have to be prepared for the unexpected. There was a YouTube video about this, building resilient secrets for disaster recovery, right?
Yes. It was hosted by Bert Blevins, a privileged access management expert.
Oh, right, yeah.
He talked about having a solid disaster recovery plan and how to protect sensitive information so you can get back on track quickly if things go sideways.
It's a great resource for anyone who deals with data security. He emphasized how important it is to think about disaster recovery from the beginning, not just as an afterthought.
So build it in from the start.
Exactly. It's much easier to design systems to be resilient from the ground up.
Okay. Another expert who popped up in our research is Shara, a cybersecurity expert. He was interviewed in one of those YouTube videos.
Oh yeah, Shara. He had some great insights about the latest security practices.
He really stressed the importance of a layered security approach.
Yes.
Using a combination of tools and techniques to protect against both internal and external threats.
He's a big advocate for that. And he also talked about how important user education and awareness is. That's something that keeps coming up in our research.
It's a huge part of ITP. He also talked about how companies need to stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
Because the threats are always changing, you have to be proactive and adapt as new challenges pop up.
It's like a game of chess where your opponent is always learning new moves.
Speaking of staying ahead of the game, one area that's getting a lot of attention is privileged access management, or PAM.
Right, PM.
Yeah.
That's all about managing and securing those really important accounts that have access to the most sensitive systems. System administrators, database admins, the people who have the keys to the kingdom.
So keeping a close eye on the people with the most power.
Exactly. If those accounts are compromised, it can be disastrous.
Makes sense. So how does PAM actually work?
PAM solutions usually use a bunch of different technologies and processes. Things like managing passwords from a central location, monitoring and recording user sessions, and controlling access with workflows and permissions.
So like a security camera and a logbook for everything those privileged users do.
You got it. You send over some videos about PAM, right?
Yes. Enterprise Privileged Access Management, PAM password fillers and multi-factor authentication, and mastering identity management with Entra ID.
Those are all really informative. They cover the benefits of PAM, best practices for implementation, and specific tools and solutions.
One thing that really stood out was how important it is to integrate PAM with other security solutions.
Definitely. PAM shouldn't be a standalone thing. It needs to work smoothly with other security tools like identity and access management systems, threat detection systems, and security information management systems.
So it's all about creating a complete security ecosystem where everything works together.
Exactly. And that's the key to effective ITP. Having a coordinated and integrated approach that covers all aspects of identity and access security.
We've covered a lot of ground. From the basics of ITP to specific strategies like MFA, Oath OTP, Cloud Identity Discovery, and PAM, we've talked about user education, disaster recovery planning, and staying ahead of the curve. But what I'm really curious about is what's next for ITP?
Right.
With all the technology that's coming out, how do you see this whole field evolving in the next 5 to 10 years?
That's a great question. It's hard to say for sure, but there are definitely some trends that are shaping the future of ITP.
So what's coming next for ITP? What kind of big changes are we looking at?
Well, I think AI and machine learning are going to be huge.
Yeah.
We're already seeing them used for threat detection and response, but it's just going to get bigger.
Like AI is becoming this super security guard,
Right.
always watching, finding patterns, and reacting to threats way faster than we can.
Exactly. And it's not just about speed, it's about prediction. AI can help us see threats coming before they even happen. By looking at tons of data and spotting those subtle patterns, it can alert us to things we might not even notice.
Wow, so it's not just reacting anymore, it's like preventing crime before it happens. But isn't there a risk of AI getting too powerful? What about the ethical side of things?
That's a really important point. As AI gets more sophisticated, we have to make sure it's used responsibly. We have to be aware of potential biases in the data it learns from and make sure it's not used for discrimination or harm.
So it's not just about the tech, it's about the human values behind it.
Right.
We need to make sure AI is used to make things safer, not to take away privacy or people's rights.
Absolutely. Human oversight and ethical considerations will always be key, even as AI gets more involved in ITP. Another trend I'm seeing is decentralized identity systems.
Decentralized identity, that sounds like something out of sci-fi.
I know, right?
What does it even mean?
So right now, our digital identities are mostly controlled by big organizations, governments, companies, social media platforms. But decentralized identity puts individuals back in control of their own data.
So instead of our information being all over the place, we'd have our own personal data vaults that we manage.
Exactly. And these systems often use blockchain technology to make sure everything's secure, transparent, and can't be changed.
Blockchain, like what's behind Bitcoin and all that. It's interesting how all these different technologies are coming together.
It is.
So how would this decentralized identity actually work in the real world?
Imagine having a digital wallet on your phone that holds all your verified information. Driver's license, passport, school transcripts, medical records. You choose what to share and with whom.
So it's like a super secure portable ID for the digital world.
Exactly. No more filling out forms or remembering a million passwords.
Sounds amazing. But are there any downsides or challenges with this?
Well, one challenge is making sure all these different systems can talk to each other. We need standards and protocols so everything works smoothly.
So everyone needs to be speaking the same language in this new world. What about security? If people are in control of their own data, what if they lose their phone or forget their password?
That's a good point. That's why strong security is even more important for these systems. Things like biometrics, multi-factor authentication, and secure key management are essential to protect that data.
So the responsibility for security shifts from those big organizations to us, which means we have to be even more careful.
Right.
But if it's done right, it seems like decentralized identity could really change how we think about privacy and security online.
I think so too. It could revolutionize digital identity. And that brings us to authentication itself.
Okay.
We've come a long way from simple passwords, but what's next?
Right.
Continuous authentication is something to watch.
Continuous authentication. What's that?
Instead of logging in once, it's a system that constantly verifies your identity based on your behavior and biometrics.
So you're always being authenticated in the background
Right.
based on things like how you type or hold your phone.
Exactly. It creates a smoother and more secure experience.
Like an invisible security shield that's always on.
Yeah, kind of. But wouldn't that be a privacy concern?
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
For sure. This type of authentication uses a lot of personal data, so privacy is a big issue. We have to make sure that data is used responsibly and that people have control over their information.
It's a balancing act between security and privacy. But it's exciting to think about how this tech is changing the whole idea of digital identity.
It really is. And it's all happening so fast. Who knows what we'll be talking about in a few years?
Right. One thing's for sure, ITP is going to keep changing quickly. But it's important to remember that security is about more than just technology. It's about people.
Absolutely. Tech is just one part of it. At the end of the day, ITP is about protecting people, their data, their privacy, their whole digital lives.
And that's why education and awareness are so important. No matter how good the technology gets, people will always make mistakes. We need to teach people how to be careful and protect themselves online.
Couldn't agree more. Security is everyone's responsibility. It starts with each of us taking care of our own digital identity.
Well said. It's been amazing exploring ITP with you. We've talked about the latest threats, the best solutions, and even the ethical questions around it all.
It's been great talking with you.
I hope our listeners have a better understanding of ITP and what they can do to stay safe in today's digital world.
I hope so too.
And I hope they'll keep learning and stay involved in the conversation about security and privacy.
Me too. Things are changing all the time, so we need to keep learning, adapting, and working together.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. Thanks so much for joining us and sharing your insights.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. We hope you found this episode informative and helpful. Until next time, stay safe out there in the digital world.